Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 179th edition. Can't believe it, 179 of Frank and Stan Chat. And those watching on video will notice that we've got two guests with us who have been on the chat before. So that's Alun Davies and Bryn Llewellyn. Hello, both of you. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. Pretty good, thank you. Looking forward
nice,
to today.
Nice to see that your appearance in October 22 didn't end your professional careers and that you're still
very nearly.
We'll come to you in a minute, just about give us an update on what you've been doing. So Stan, how are you this week?
Good. I know it's unusual to say I'm fighting fit and everything seems fine.
No coughs, no colds.
A good week, so yeah. Should mention it's St. David's Day today, so hence the daffodils, I assume.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to bring a leek, but nah.
A man of your age, that's probably not a good thing to talk about, Stan. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, as I say, it was October 22 when you were last on, gents. I mean, it'd probably be useful just to give you a little bit of time to tell us, what have you been doing since then? And you were on, I think, primarily because you were heavily involved in a book called Move and Learn, and that sort of work around that. Or Learn and Move. I can't remember which way around it is. Which way around is it, Bryn?
It is Move and Learn, but actually, does it matter? It could
well, that's probably the nature of it, isn't it? Anyway, should we go to you first, Bryn? So, what have you been doing since October 22?
Well, it's good that you mentioned the book, because actually, your review on Schools Week, I think, was the catalyst to maybe like 3 extra sales. No, it was very kind of you to take time to read the book and actually review the book. It was much appreciated, especially coming from someone with your background who knows the school system and knows about the education landscape. So thank you for that.
No, that was
so. What has happened since then? Many things. So I think this week epitomizes what I've been doing since then, in terms of I spent 3 days with 5 different schools down in London, and they brought me in to do work about Tagtivate. So it's linking maths and English and foundation subjects to TIG or tag rugby, depending on how sporty you want to be. And it's about taking the learning in those subjects outside into the playground, onto the field, or into the hall. But then in amongst that, the teachers were kind of drawn to the content of Move and Learn, the book, in terms of like, how can we break up sedentary time with simple ideas, with no resources, or low cost, no cost resources. And it was that kind of like, so while I was doing that in London with 3 schools, bonkers, Ian, who was the co-author from Move and Learn, he was working up north with schools in Rosendale, doing the Move and Learn approaches and more about behavioural change. So my work is between Tagtivate, Move and Learn, and enjoying it.
Yeah.
I get to do the best part in terms of working with kids, children, staff, and not having to do the stuff that I used to do, that I had to do, in terms of all those pupil progress meetings. And that leads me on to nicely to Alun, in terms of his work is crucial in terms of like developing staff in his part of the world.
So yeah, okay. Alun, what have you been up to?
So unfortunately, I mean, last time we spoke in October 22, I'd just come out of headship at that point, and moving into school improvement work. And the intention was that would free me up to work a little bit more alongside Bryn and to do more on the active learning. As it's not turned out that way. I've been incredibly busy working on the school improvement and leadership support down here. Plus, if I'm being honest, taking advantage of the additional time it's given me to spend time with. We've got a 5-year-old. And actually, once it opened up opportunities to spend more time with him, that sort of overtook it. So I can't claim to have done a massive amount, apart from keeping contact with Bryn and keep abreast of what's been happening there. I say I've been very much tied up in working with school leaders, but that's been really eye-opening in the last 18 months. And as you two will know, the privilege of being able to go into lots of different schools and spend time with leaders and really unpick and uncover what we need to be doing to support our staff at the moment and our school leaders at the moment, and to keep them in the seat, because unfortunately many of them are taking the decision to step away, and that's a huge issue. So that's what's been keeping me busy.
I mean, just a question for me is when I go into schools, a number of senior leaders, heads predominantly, or CEOs are saying, "Well, I think I'm sort of running out of steam. And I'm too young to retire. So they go, is there a world for us outside of leadership?" My response always will try and just refresh yourself, because obviously I think there's a shortage of heads, and what you don't want to do is encourage them all to become consultants and do other stuff, but that transition, I think just taking time out for themselves is one of the things that they find particularly difficult, and as resources are tightened and senior leadership teams are reduced, there are fewer people, so there's less time for them to feel able to get out and to have a break and just start to recharge their thinking, not just their energy, but their thinking about the future.
Absolutely. I mean, I know that's something. Sorry,
Sorry,
something Bryn and I have spoken about before, isn't it, Bryn? About in many other industries, if you've been a leader for 5 years, the sabbatical opportunities are always there, and to take time out to go and do some research and have a break. And that's not something we've ever built into our system. But I think it's something that would do exactly that, Frank. It would give head teachers that headspace to go away, refresh, do some learning, do some research, but actually then come back firing and want to go again, rather than the option that many are taking at the moment, which is just stepping away, and many stepping away from the profession completely.
My first ever role, having qualified as a teacher, was to cover a person who was allowed to take 2 terms off, to have that 2-term sabbatical. Have I ever come across that since? No. But would it be welcome? Yes.
Yes.
Well, I think it would need to be a compulsory sabbatical of at least a term, because there'll be a lot of people saying, I can't afford to have a term off where the school is, what we've got to do. It'd have to be, well, your 5 years is up, you have to now take at least a term out, and that to be funded. Yeah,
because if you ask a head teacher, there's never a right time, is there?
No, there's
never
not.
a right time to take a break. There's always something around the corner.
Only just after Ofsted.
Possibly, but then
Ofsted but that's when we'll be doing all our exciting stuff.
Yeah, that's when we were doing the move and learn work.
Whoa!
When Alan and I used to connect on a regular basis up in Leeds, and I remember you used to do the smartwatch and the tracking of your blood pressure and your heart rate, and it was visible. It was just jumped out, didn't it, in terms of that change between term time, and then you would gradually get into like half term, or better still, a 2-week break, and you could see it. It was there in terms of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to give people that opportunity to just, like say, freshen up, get some energy back, because that's what I'm hearing the same message from you, Frank, that head teachers saying, I've still got another 15-20 years to do, and I cannot keep going at this pace. What do I do? And that is the scary situation. We should be able to put something in place to help them. I mean, you're right, we can't just say go and be education consultants. That's not a field that we can keep throwing people into, and so as a result, they're going out of the profession. And
also, some of them not very good at it. I mean, it's a very different. I mean, for those of us who've reasonably successfully transitioned, that there are colleagues who are very just don't have that sort of interpersonal skills with people to draw some of this stuff out. It is not about being the leader anymore, is it?
No. It's also about keeping your learning current as well. Because it's, I remember when I first became an advisor, the boss said to me, in this first year, you've got in your pocket some gold dust that's from you being ahead for 10 years, and you can sprinkle that over other heads and use your experience, but that gold dust will run out. And in the meantime, you need to refill it with new learning, new thinking, working with other people, etc., to keep your knowledge and your experience up to date. And I think that's very difficult if you're working on your own.
I'm quite fortunate in terms of the work that I did with schools in Bradford lend itself to working with communities. So in Bradford, the same as like, Burnley, Preston, Blackburn, with a varied population. And so we were commissioned to work with madrasas. So the children in Bradford, a lot of them would go to school where they'd be sitting down, then they'd quickly go home for some food, then they go to madrasa for an hour and a half, and they'd be sitting down. So we were like commissioned to work with community engagement officers or leaders within those madrasa settings to break up the sitting down time so they could learn Arabic, the Quran in maybe a not so traditional way. And since then, we've been welcomed across to work with Together an Active Future in Lancashire. And again, it's working with those community leaders. And I'm learning all the time from that thing, like, whoa, it's a combination of like fear and curiosity. But by working with adults or people who aren't necessarily teachers or school leaders, it's fascinating just to see a different mindset, a different way of working. Yeah.
Can I mean, before we get on to what's called RI, because I was in a school yesterday and we were talking to a head teacher, and I have this, I suppose I'm biased towards what I'm going to say now. So, all right. So I'm going to be very clear about this, that there is I was saying that sometimes, you know, having consultants or advisors coming into your school for a long period of time, actually, I think is counterproductive. I feel as a consultant that like Stan was saying, you got this sort of gold dust, or you got this stuff that people want to draw from you. But actually, unless you're sort of replenishing that, then your value to them, you know, I think is lost, you know, and is not as powerful as it is on the sort of the early times when you go in, when they're very receptive, and you in a way you're trying to tease out from each other what the relationship is, and you can perhaps be a little bit more direct because you haven't got, well, it may be that you can be more direct and you've got a very strong relationship. But for me, the issue is around in multi-academy trusts, this sort of development of expertise on people on permanent contracts who are like the primary curriculum leader on a permanent contract. And I'm thinking, I'm really worried about that approach, because for me, that having people on permanent contracts, you know, actually that is, I think your returns are getting smaller, getting fewer as they are in their job longer. So I think for me, it's around at a time of tight budgets, there's a debate to be had as to whether or not big, heavy central sort of control with permanent people is more, is it better to have people like yourselves coming in perhaps for a year or whatever, going away, you know, then coming back again a few years later, and just sort of churning it like that, as opposed to having rigid structured posts with people in there.
I fully agree with that. I think
yeah,
you've got a certain length, I think, where you can have that impact, and then they need to hear different voices and they need different ideas. But I know, again, something Bryn and I talked about when I was ahead, I used to have very much of an approach that I do things in 2 or 3 year cycles, you know, and say this is where we're going to go for the next 2 years, and then we reevaluate it, and the school could go in a very different direction at that point, and you know, want to create a different, not necessarily a different culture, but a different emphasis and a different drive. And we'd have to look then at what was needed to create that. You don't want to get that continuous cycle of just doing the same and just trying to improve on the same. I think there's got to be that change, because that's what freshens people up again, and that's what does maintain that enthusiasm and momentum.
Yeah. Bryn, the other advantage, Frank, is if you're buying in from, and I have to declare an interest in it, but if you're buying in people from an organisation, that the people see many schools, not just your school or not just your few schools, that's a very different approach. If you can say, well, I've been in 4 schools in the last month and they're doing A, B, C and D, you know, why don't you look at what they're doing? That's much stronger than I've only been in the schools that we all know, we all work together.
Yeah.
Just I mean ideas.
Yeah, I think also I'm interested in Bryn, just bring you in here. I mean, in terms of the move and learn approach that you take with schools, I mean, is there a set period where they're red hot and they go for it, and then it tails off, and you know, and another project or another idea comes forward? You know, how do you sort of manage to ensure that that sort of philosophy is maintained beyond the initial excitement, you know, so that in 2 years' time they're still doing it, you know?
Yeah, Alan mentioned culture there. I mean, like behavioural change and cultural change takes time. So you've got to like listen to the school and think about, you know, what are the capabilities of the teachers and the school to move things forward? What opportunities to give them? What about their own personal motivations? It's a case of looking at those three elements and just going back and revisiting. And quite often you'll find that there's a particular teacher, or better still, a team of teachers who then take the message forward. And it does come back to when I was saying about the active madrasas, people will trust the messenger before they'll trust the message.
Right.
And I think if you get on board, you know, not necessarily newly qualified teachers or ECTs, but getting middle leaders on board so that they become the driving force within the school. But then it, again, giving them chances to, like Alan's already said this, about reflection, you know, get a chance to genuinely like talk to the children, utilize pupil voice toolkits and work out what's working for the children. I know, you know, people look at evidence and research, and they look at the Education Endowment Fund and they look at this, but quite often the evidence is skewed in the favor of whatever.
Yeah.
And sometimes you don't need to measure, you just need to look. And by looking, I mean like talking to the children, watching the children, and thinking about, you know, what genuine impact is this strategy or this intervention having on the children.
You don't want it to be the drive the whole time either. I mean, that's the key thing, you know, bring in sort of the active learning approach, or I see the same. I mean, Aurus is a big drive at the moment in a lot of schools. You want to bring that in as a drive, but then you want it to just become embedded within what you do, within everybody's pedagogy, and that they're just using it and they're not even thinking about it really. It's just happening. And that's when, you know, ultimately that's what Bryn wants to get to. And what the active move and learning is about is just that just becomes every day in the classroom and what you do.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we look at the subtitle of the book in terms of like embedding physically active learning into the classroom, it should just be part and parcel of what's good teaching, what's amazing learning. It shouldn't be something separate. I mean, you know, life's not binary between there and there. There's quite a lot of like in betweenness. And I'm not saying that we need to sit down all the time or stand up and have fun and whatever all the time. It's just a case of like blending and mixing and matching.
Yeah, I think that's been the philosophy of this chat, to be honest. I think that's where we're on the common ground, isn't it, Stan? I mean, we always go back to, you know, we shouldn't be here and we shouldn't be here. You know, we should be aware of what's over here and what's over here. But the safe place for us all professionally, and I think for the children, it's less risky, is somewhere here. You know, somewhere here. Okay, Stan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I think this fits into to what we've been saying. It's James Timpson, the owner of Timpson Shops, and he was interviewed on Channel 4 about his upside down management. And basically his upside down management is saying, instead of an organization where the people at the top tell everybody down the system what they must do and how they must do it, he starts at the bottom, and the people who run the shops are completely allowed to do what they want. There are two rules. One, you've got to dress appropriately. You've got, as he said, you've got to look the part. And secondly, you've got to put the money in the till. Beyond that, the way you operate and the way you work and whether you give discounts, whether you order the right stuff, is all down to you. And he says he measures it by how happy they are. And what he's found was, in his shops where the shop people are happiest, they're the ones that make the most money. So he's reversed the idea of chasing the money, and now he's chasing happiness amongst his staff. And he measures how happy they are rather than how much money they're making, because he knows the happier he can make them, the more money they will make for Timpson's. And it's just a lovely philosophy. And he obviously lives it as well, because I know he does a lot for ex-prisoners, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He takes that. But I just think, just to think a little bit differently about the structure of an organisation. It must be a big organisation, because there are Timpson's shops everywhere.
One of the first questions I ask when I go to a school, I did this yesterday, you know, what's your churn like? You know, have you got a lot of staff leaving? Or have you got a fairly stable staff? Not completely, everybody's in post, no one's moving, you know. And the head yesterday was saying, well, I can't find a maths teacher for love nor money, you know, and music is a problem. But he was saying that, no, I don't have, you know, an exodus of staff. When you speak to staff, you say, I was talking to a very senior leader in that school, and said, well, why do you stay? And he said, well, I stay because I like the community. I like the head a lot, because he tells me, this is your job, get on with it. And if you've got a problem, come and tell me about it. He's not on my back all the time about the delivery of it, you know. And in a way,
happiness is something though, Frank. I mean, how many times when you were ahead were staff actually laughing and joking with each other in break times and lunch? I think that's a real indicator of the culture of an organisation. Because, I mean, I know it was a long time ago, but I used to say that some part of every day, the staff are together and are laughing. And that was what kept me in the job, because I thought that's what we were about. And the results in the school were very good.
Bryn?
Yeah. I'm just thinking about this, the schools today. I'm focusing on the schools this week because they're fresh in my mind. So it was 5 schools over 3 days, and there were like 27 sessions during the school day and then after school CPD sessions. But in each of those sessions, what I saw were teachers with high expectations, but a gorgeous rapport with the children, and the use of humor, and they knew those children inside out. So it was just like a joy to see, and then talking to the teachers. And London's different in terms of like their recruitment might incorporate teachers from Australia or South Africa or wherever. And then these teachers would work in one school for a while, then slip over to another school where the demand was. But it was genuinely a case of like, wow, this works. Yeah.
I just wonder if there's a correlation between a happy staff and school performance, and it'd be interesting if somebody could find a way of researching that.
Alan's brain's ticking over there, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I know. I mean, I think it relates in a lot of ways. I think, you know, going back to one thing you said there about letting them run the shop how they want. I think as a teacher, that's what I always said is, you know, let me teach how I want to teach. If I don't get the results, then hold me to account. And as a head, I kind of had that approach with staff. We're not going to dictate the pedagogy in your classroom and how you have to do things, unless you're not getting the outcomes, and then they'll have to be.
But that's a scaffolding approach then, though, Alan, isn't it? That
absolutely.
You can say, well, we know that this approach has worked in other settings, or in this school, even with teachers in, you know, your position. Let's go down that route as a step back to move forward.
Yeah, and you want the children to experience different learning experiences as well. You want them to see different styles. I think if I'm being devil's advocate, I think what some heads might say to you at this point, Stan, is but he hasn't got somebody looking over his shoulder. You know, he hasn't got Ofsted telling him, well, that's okay, you're still being happy. But I'm not disagreeing with you by any chance. I'm just saying what some might say.
I think we create the ghost that's looking over our shoulder. I really do. I think it's, in some cases, it's an imaginary monster that's driving us. I spoke to a head just recently who's coming up to an inspection. He's in the zone now, and he said 90% of what I'm doing is for Ofsted, and if it wasn't for that one word judgment, I wouldn't be doing any of it. And this is somebody who's a very, very good head, and he was analysing just how much work in a day he was doing to prepare for Ofsted. And so
that does impact. That does impact, because that pressure that he feels from that, it will spill over. Not intentionally, but it must pass on. It must. And when you talk about that happiness, that's got to have an impact, hasn't it? So yeah, I completely agree with you, but I think there is that argument that heads would give you.
I agree, and you know, as I said before, half in jest, but whenever I work with heads about doing some innovation, it was always, we'll do it, but let's wait till Ofsted have been, because, you know, and then we'll do our innovation, then we'll change our curriculum, then we'll do some active learning. But until they've been, let's just stay safe.
Well, let's move off James Timpson. Where should we go now? Alan, what's caught your eye this week?
Well, I'm going to go for one, if you don't mind, that caught my ear. Just slightly different. So I was listening to 5 Live on Monday morning, about 7:20, and they were on an article on there. It was somebody from the Institute for Employment Studies talking about, should employees take some responsibility for supporting their employees with weight management to try and help reduce the obesity across society. and what role can the workplace play on that? And on all that, that's a discussion in itself, and something we might get into a little bit. I was sat there thinking, if I was a head teacher this morning, just driving up to the school gate, and I'd just be thinking, is this something else I'm going to have to make myself an expert in very, very quickly, so that I can start advising staff on how to manage their weight, and how am I going to have those conversations? And I just thought, again, these things that happen, they get brought in and universally looked at in terms of employment and employment law and things, but in a school it tends to fall on one person to do that. And going back to what we said earlier about head teachers and them being able to manage their workload and stress levels at the moment, I thought that threw another spanner in there.
Mm. What happens if the head's the person who's
well, that was brought up by one of the people, because obviously people were able to contribute that, and they said, it's that message, isn't it, that comes to you, and who's giving that message as well. And I think, I mean, there's a whole host of things around it. And I don't disagree. I mean, it fits in a lot with the Resolution Foundation reports that they've done around health and wellbeing in the workplace. And there is nothing wrong with considering that. And I'm not against that approach. And we should be looking at, how do our workplaces impact on our health and well-being, and how do our roles and what we're expecting. We're talking about giving children opportunities to move and learn, and do we make sure that's an opportunity for everybody else as well, or are we confining them? But it was, it's just that impact on who's going to do it. And I work with a lot of schools in this area. We've got very small, as you will in some of your areas, village primary schools with one head teacher and 4 staff, and the demands on that person, and that individual, to manage all this. I look back to things when like GDPR came in, and that was never designed for schools, but the impact that has had on school leaders just to manage that alone. And it's just another one of those things. So that's what caught my ear.
Bryn, what about you?
I'm just thinking about what you said about obesity and everything else. I'm reading a book at the moment by Chris Van Tullochen, and it's called Ultra Processed People. And it's just the fact that all this money is being made by the food industry, the sugar industry, etc. And it's scary. It really is. I used to think it would be about physical activity that would bring down obesity levels, and think in terms of the impact in terms of NHS spending on obesity and obesity-related illness. And again, it comes down to not necessarily the activity levels, but it's about what we put inside our bodies all the time. And it's just so easy to reach for that biscuit on the staff room table, when really what we could have done is something different. But behavioural change takes time.
So what's caught your eye this week then, Bryn?
Oh, well, as I say, 3 days down in London, I've become a bit of an Alan Partridge persona, sitting in there in my cheap B&B. So I get drawn into various Twitter spats and conversations. It was the one about attendance and school holidays. And like where I live in Wakefield, we live right next door to the local grammar school. And they're there a little bit earlier, and yes, they're there a little bit later every day, because I can see the big black 4-wheel drives, etc., etc. And then you see on the school fields, and you see the kids taking part in PE, sport. They even have golf lessons during curriculum time. But it's the fact that they finish school a whole week earlier, so they can access all these cheap holidays. And so maybe it's just the disparity between state and independent schools that's caught my eye, in terms of like the injustice, maybe not, certainly the imbalance.
I do think it's the typical approach from any government that the answer to this is to fine people more. When if you're fining somebody £60 and it's having no difference whatsoever, fining them 80 isn't going to make any difference at all. And you end up fining the wrong people, because those that are healthy enough not to bother about it just add it onto the cost of the holiday, and those that have real problems getting the children into school probably are the same people who haven't got the money in the first place. So it's about motivation. We've got to have kids motivated to go to school, not threatened if they don't go. There's a very different approach, I think, needed.
We know that, Stan, don't we, from working in school. When you look at behaviour management in school, it's about the environment, it's about the culture, it's about the positivity,
relationships,
and relationships. Yeah. That's what has an impact on behaviour, not, you know, sanctions and exclusion, things like that. That doesn't change it. That just hides it under a carpet. Increasing a fine by £20, as you say, the only people it's going to hurt are the ones that we don't want it to hurt. Who, you know, it's the wrong way. It's the wrong way of doing things. It's just an easy thing to throw out there and say we're doing this big gesture, but no one in schools. I can't imagine there's many people in schools who think that that is going to make any difference whatsoever.
I think also there was somebody from the DFE on BBC Radio yesterday trying to defend it and saying, well, 6 weeks is long enough for you to get away for your 2-week holiday if you want it. But actually, I don't know if any of you have worked in a sort of fairly large organisation, you know, where everybody wants to take the same period of time. You know, there is a limit. It's not 6 weeks if you've got kids in year 11. You've got to be back for exams day. You know, and it's not the same if actually everybody in your team has got children of primary school age where you want the same weeks. And that means that at times you can't take it. You know, the company will not allow you to have the time off in the 6 or 5 week holiday period. You know, what do you do then?
And there's also, I mean, I know everyone cites this, but it is a genuine issue about the price. Somebody posted 2 different prices on the centre parks. 1 week before school holidays, 1 week during, and it was £1,000 difference. And so, you know, for a family who want to take the kids on holiday, £1,000 difference for the sake of a week, when I'm sure people would argue last week of term, did they do that much work then? All that. And I do think there's a lot. I understand the inconvenience to school, but I do think that's a little bit overplayed. Because it's like to say a child who joins your school can never succeed because they've not been through all the lessons that you've been on and not built on, blah, blah, blah. And you just respond to that by finding out what the child knows and building on from there. So it's possible. It's inconvenient. It's probably annoying, but it's not the end of the world. And it's certainly, in my view, not the end of a child's education because they've missed 2 weeks when they've actually been on safari and found out far more, learned far more than they would have done in school that week anyway.
Well, what's caught my eye links into this because the government has announced they've appointed an attendance ambassador, which is Paul Tarn, the CEO of Northern Education Trust. And I offer this primarily as a sort of good governance point. I may be wrong, but I'm not sure. I don't remember there being a big national campaign advertising that role where actually people could apply for it, and those working in sort of not just in the academies but in maintained schools, local authorities, whoever it may be, could actually put themselves forward. And I just feel as though, you know, this sort of lack of openness and transparency around some of these sort of czar-like posts is I think deeply worrying, because at the end of the day, people like me go sniffing around the data, the national school data, and just do quick reviews of Northern Education Trust to see what their rates of suspensions and exclusions are. And in a way, I would expect somebody in that position to be, you know, really somebody who actually is working in a very challenging community, has turned the community around, has exceptionally high levels of attendance, and actually draw out from that what the good messages are. There's nothing hidden, you know, that in effect there's a really positive story to tell here, and it may well be with Northern Education Trust, but there is just some concern for me around some of that data, which puts that seed of doubt in my mind, and that's not the sort of thing you need when you're trying to be the country's ambassador on attendance. You know, you need to be, I think, whiter than white in order to demonstrate to the sector that, you know, I'm credible here. You know, there's just too many sort of things in that cupboard for me. So I would like to see much more openness by the government, whichever government it is, around these posts, and they're given to people who apply, they're interviewed for it. We know the process and it's very transparent. it doesn't appear to be the case for this post, and that to me is a mistake. I wish Paul Tarn all the best, with the work that he's got to do. But there's a message here for how we appoint these people.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to the COVID recovery plan that Sir Kevin Collins put forward, and then that was chucked out the window based around finance. Was it a case of somebody couldn't make money on the back of that? I don't know. That's me being old and cynical, by the way. But these questions, you're right, they need to be asked. And, we need to look in terms of like that accountability and honesty and authenticity. And when we look at the media or certain sections, it's not there.
No.
It should be. If we're going to be the role models for the children as teachers or TAs or whatever, we need to have those role models with us, whether or not they're within government or with the multi-category trust setups. And I could tell anecdotes and stories about different academy trusts, some good, some bad, some ugly, but not for now. But we know these things go on, and it's a case of how do we call them out in a correct way, or how do we ask questions? How do we get people to ask more questions?
I think we're in a position at the moment, and it goes back to something that I heard from a former education secretary who said that, when Michael Gove and Cummings were running, the idea was to smash the existing, but what they hadn't done at that time is come up with a plan for what it would look like after it had been smashed. And now we've got so many independent trusts that it's difficult to manage. So it's as if now the next step is to try and pull these together into some kind of geographic, and if we're not careful, we'll just reinvent local authorities in a different way, maybe in a for-profit way. I don't know. I know that was part of the thinking when they smashed the system, that they would be able to bring in for-profit schools. So maybe that's still on the back burner somewhere. But I think it's very difficult to manage a whole system when you haven't got your fingers on what's going on. I read the figure, and I can't remember it, of how many trusts there are at the moment.
I found this on the web.
Sorry, that was my watch trying to answer the question for me.
Well, I know standing Suffolk, I think we've got over 40 academy trusts just within the county.
So just to bring the leaders of those together to talk
absolutely
about is virtually impossible.
Well, that's the job I had in Blackpool, and actually it was really difficult. We had only 8 secondary schools. The most challenging group were the CEOs, not the head teachers. And it wasn't in my time, but a call out to the colleague who did that before me. But it was sticky. CEOs took that role on thinking they had freedom, and actually what Blackpool was saying was, well, actually there's a regeneration strategy for the town. You've got schools in the town. Why aren't you contributing to the regeneration strategy? You've got to do that by doing certain things which you yourself may not want to do in any other school. And they were saying, well, we don't do that in any other school. Why do we have to do it in Blackpool? Well, you have to do it in Blackpool because you're in Blackpool and it's regenerating Blackpool. So I think it is, it's probably for next week, but there was also a case, wasn't there, about the ARC Academy Trust this week, who one of its trustees, they've taken the tweets down now, but were supporting or liking, fairly sort of right-wing tweets made by others. And actually there is a sort of, in football, we have a fit and proper test, which is challenged a lot, but at least they have it. We don't have that in the multi-academy trust world. And literally anybody can be a trustee or a member, and it goes, to a certain extent, the same happens with governors, so in a way there's no fit and proper test that we use. There are the Nolan principles, but actually, there's as this government has found, there are ways around that. So I do think this is the next, for me, the next focus. The next move is to look very carefully at who are managing, who's overseeing the schools that are no longer under local authority control, as well as those that are under local authority control, because local authorities haven't got the resources to do all that sort of stuff the way that they used to in the past.
And to be fair, not all local authorities were successful in the first
Oh,
place.
well,
Part of the problem in the first instance.
yeah, I have to say some of the worst school improvement oversight was when we were doing local authority inspections. So absolutely had no idea what was going on. So yeah, perhaps for next week. Can I just say finally, it's our eldest daughter's big birthday today. So I just want to wish Rebecca a very happy birthday, and we'll be all around we're into Amici's restaurant tonight in Bramall, so the crowd will be there. So happy birthday, Rebecca.
Can I ask how old will Rebecca be?
It's a very special birthday. I think I can tell you because she looks 25, but she's 40. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that call out was about his daughter's birthday or to get a discount at the restaurant.
But as Bryn says, so few sales from the sale of his daughter from the watching the show. It's unlikely to reach that.
It's more likely to put the price up.
Can I just come back very quickly to what you said about like Timpson and this ground up thing? And I think sometimes we've got to go back to why we get into teaching in the first place. It's about the children. And sometimes like watching, say, the play leaders or the move and learn champions, ambassadors, whatever you want to call them, watching older children working with younger children. And you're sometimes watching like, how did you do that? You've got the kids, these younger kids in the palm of your hand, and you're like facilitating the learning. And I know, like, you know, when you think in terms of like the lack of time, lack of resources, I do think that it comes back to the children are probably the most unused, untapped resource that we have within schools in terms of looking at ways that they can help younger children, whether or not it's related to phonics or maths or whatever, or even just like playing, having fun. And I do think there are a lot of examples out there, and sometimes it's easy to get bogged down with the negativity on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. But you come back and then you look at the children, you think, you know what? You know, there is a little bit of hope.
Yeah.
I've mentioned before in America where we saw at the end of every lesson, there was a 10-minute session where the children sat in groups and talked about the lesson. And when I talked to one of the students there and said, you know, well, what was all that about? And she said, well, I understand now the lesson because these people talk the way I understand it, and the teacher didn't necessarily. So that 10 minutes has made it for me. I now understand what we're talking about. And I thought it was a really powerful use of students in the classroom for 10 minutes, just to say, right, your job now is to talk about the lesson we've just had amongst yourselves. It's like reflecting at the end of a course, but if you're running a course and you say, no, we're going to have 15 minutes of reflection, everyone thinks you've run out of ideas.
But I know we don't have gone too long. I know, Frank, you want to pull it together, but we talked about reflection right at the beginning, didn't we? About that time for reflection, the importance of that at all levels, you know, from whether you're talking about it from bottom up. I never like to look at it as a hierarchy, but every member of that, every stakeholder within there, giving them that time to reflect and say, what are we doing well? And it's funny, I've changed my approach when I go into schools now. I used to start off with a little 5 minutes about what's on your mind at the moment, what are your concerns, in case we need to discuss them. And I've started now with, tell me about your successes. Tell me, and head teachers really struggle.
I used to do the same thing, and I would guarantee that before the sentence had finished, they'd say, but. We're doing really well with this, and this, but you can absolutely guarantee it.
I would say, but so I think all of us visit schools regularly. I think we're all impressed by the quality of the experience that, you know, the effort everyone's putting into it. You know, you hear a lot of stuff, don't you, as you were saying. But actually, you know, I invariably leave schools feeling positive and upbeat about, you know, the future, and in awe of, you know, the talent that there is, particularly within the teaching staff there, you know.
So it's a privilege, and it's inspiring every day to go into different schools and see what people are doing, and everybody needs praise for what they're doing for our children and what the children are doing as well, because as Bryn said, they're the key to it all, and they're fantastic.
Yeah, and when you have those meetings with the school leaders, I always do, in terms of let's walk and talk. Let's show me your school. So celebrate. So we're not sitting down. And then you see, and the teachers, the school leaders, they can actually look back and think, you know what? I've done a lot. But you need to walk and you need to see it to get it.
Yeah.
I've noticed
sometimes
a
with
massive
a
difference.
spreadsheet in front of you, you can look at the numbers, you can look at the data, but sometimes you just need to look.
Yeah.
So I've noticed a massive difference when you do that walk and talk, what head teachers take you to see. Because when I started as an advisor, it was always either the toilets or the block with that. It was always something physical in the building that they'd had done. It was never look at the learning that's going on here.
Yeah.
Look at now it's different. Now they talk about what's going on in the classrooms. Now they talk about what the children are doing. But it used to be, oh, let me take you to the boys' toilets. Well, I'm not sure that's what I really want to do at this point.
Right, well, we'll bring it to a close because actually we've been on for nearly 45 minutes. So we normally just do about 30. So been a great chat this morning. Thank you both, gents, for joining us. Love to have you back. If we're still running this chat, love to have you back in 2025 for the third occasion. But to everybody else, have a good week, everyone. And hopefully all being well, we'll see you next Friday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye now.